Hi, welcome to the Gamesplainer. I'm Jeff the Gamesplainer, and today I'm Gamesplaining 2021. So it's time for my yearly top 10. What games have I enjoyed playing? Which games have risen their way to the top? And I must say that my number 10 came as a relatively large surprise. I think that's one of those games that you need to play with people to get a feel for a table and how a game works. So without further ado, let's actually get straight into it. My number 10 game for 2021 is the Alpha. As I say, this one came as a surprise. It is a smaller game. It is a guess what is happening at the table kind of decision game, but that is dictated by a die roll. There's a lot of stuff in this game that suggests to me that I'm probably not going to enjoy it as much as a lot of other games. But this game has a prisoner's dilemma in it that just feels good to play. And that's the reality of it. The prisoner's dilemma idea of we could all go for the high, really good thing, but if more than one of us does it, no one gets anything. But if everyone shares, then we all get a nice share. It's a really good game to play and get on the table. My number 9 for 2021 is Bonfire. Bonfire is a Stefan Feld game that I did a video for quite early in the year. I really enjoyed this, as I'm currently going to say with all of the games in this top 10. They are the top 10 games of the year out of the 52 or so games that I have done videos for. These are the real high ones. So Bonfire, it's a game where you're sitting at the table and you've got a heap of choices in front of you. Like all good Stefan Feld games, you've got a heap of choice, and the path that you take will help you get along further on this path, or will gain you stuff to be able to do that path. And there's so much different stuff going on. But as with all good Stefan Feld games, you can't do everything. I really, really appreciate that. My number 8 game for 2021 is the Castles of Tuscany. Yes, that's right. Stefan Feld has managed to hit my top 10 list twice in a row. It's really good. And you will notice also that this weekend I have released a Gamesplay and Gamesplanation for Castles of Burgundy, which is 20 years old. But Castles of Tuscany is a newer, slightly more docile version of Castles of Burgundy. And I've really appreciated the ease of play on this game. It has the same similar feelings of Burgundy, with you've got to get tiles, and when you get a tile in, you need to then put it onto your board, and once you get it onto your board, you can then do some stuff that will gain you some benefit. It's got that whole idea of it. It doesn't, however, have the dice rolling that Burgundy has. Castles of Tuscany is played more with cards, so you have to have a certain number of cards in order to be able to do the thing. And you're building up your board with different amounts of the tiles, and the boards go together differently. So of course they're smaller hex boards, and so you end up with different combinations, and you're not actually going to have the same game twice in a row simply because of those boards. There's so many different little elements on it. I really like Stefan Feld's games because it's so open and there's so much stuff that can be done. But in order to win the game, you kind of need to pick a path and go with it. But you want to pick a path of where you've got the most benefit, what you've got the most stuff coming through for. And there's a real crunch every time I play these games, so I really appreciate those. My number 7 game for 2021 is Ride the Rails. Now, Ride the Rails is part of the Iron Rails series. I did the review for the third one, Iberian Gauge, only a few weeks back. But I'm glad I've managed to get all 3 of them to the table. All 3 are vastly different games, but I felt wrong putting more than one of them into the top 10 list. So this one, I personally think this one is the better of the 3 games. I really appreciate all of them, and they all do different stuff, even though they look really similar on the board. It is a train game where you are purchasing parts of companies, and the companies then do the stuff, and you will get a benefit for owning the company when they get income in. It's that kind of core concept on all 3 of the games, but the way of play is vastly different for all 3 games, and where you put your emphasis. If you have a lot of income or a lot of ownership over a company, you're probably going to put your emphasis more on that company than other companies, and you're going to try and get other people at the table to do similar things. There's a real nice game happening within all of that stuff. My number 6 game for 2021 is Tuscany. Now, I really like this game, and once again, this is a part of a series of games from David Searchy. I believe there was something going on where people backed off from his work at some point. I haven't really been listening to podcasts, etc., or keeping up with the stuff that I should probably be keeping up with, but I like the game anyway. I put aside all the other stuff. I like this game. Partway through the year, I played this one, Twantatsuyu, and the other one, Tekehenyu. One of the other ones, Tekehenyu, next to each other, and my wife really, really enjoyed both of them. I think that's because she won both of them in a row. And so when she wins game, obviously she'll like a game better. I fear that on the first place she wasn't a huge fan, and I think that's the key with this game, and that's the same with most of the David Searchy games, that playing them the first time to learn them, you then need to play them again to really get a feel for how the game actually plays. And the more you play it, the easier it will get and the more understandable it will become. So I quite enjoy this game. The whole idea is that you're on a pyramidish ground area and you're picking spots to place your meeples, and the color of the meeple does something, and where you place it, if it's got others of the same color next to it. There's so much stuff going on with this. It's a worthwhile game to have a look into if you haven't come across it before. My number 5 game for 2021 is Alibari, A Nice Cup of Tea. I really like this game. It is a remake of Snowdonia, which is, again, one of the games that has sat quite high on my list and many other people's lists of all-time favorite games. I actually think Alibari feels more comfortable to play than Snowdonia. They're very similar games. So you're playing in different areas, in different orders. So just saying, I'm going to do that. And when we get along to that on the board, then that happens. And so if you want to do stuff further down or further up, that kind of idea. So that it's a player order change, but the stuff that you do is building a rail or clearing space to be able to build a rail line through, or clearing space to be able to plant things, and the weather changes, how much income you'll get from various things. There's so much going on with this one that it takes, once again, it's one of these games that you've got to play a couple of times to really get a good feel for it. Once you've got a feel for it and you know what you're doing, it's actually really easy and really straightforward. I really appreciate this game and any other game that does a similar thing that has a changeable line of elements. So you can go on element A, B, C, D, E. If you're playing with 2 players, there may only be one thing available. But if you're playing with 5 players, there'll be 2 or 3 things available in that space. And so you're flicking a card or putting a card down at the beginning of the game as a setup with the different player count. I think actually just over my shoulder, Crystal Palace has a similar thing where it's just a totally different board with you've got a different number of players while still being the same idea of a board. My number 4 game for 2021 is Red Rising. Now, Red Rising is a Stonemaier game. I fear that a lot of the Stonemaier games that come out have a bit of a negative thing just naturally coming from gamers who haven't even played the game, to be honest with you. I think that has come from the overall success of Wingspan or Scythe, and he's had some really solid games early on in the career of Stonemaier games. And so now when games come out, if they're not quite a Wingspan or a Scythe, people are like, oh, it's no good. But this is a really good game, as I personally think all of the Stonemaier games are. Please get rid of that attitude. Put it up against Relic Runners, for example, or Azul, or any game from any publisher. Put it up against those and see where the game lands. As you can see, this is my number 4 game. Now, with this game, you're getting a hand of cards and you're trying to manipulate that hand of cards to show the cards that will get points off other cards in your hand by the end of the game. Or each card is looking for a different number of colors or none of this color in your hand at the end of the game. And so you're trading cards out. Once you think you've got the best hand, there's stuff you can do which is just passing. But there are also some tracks that you want to kind of build your way up because they give you extra bonuses throughout the game and towards the end of the game. I really enjoyed my play of it. It plays relatively easily, but it has a whole bunch of stuff going on to think about as you're playing through the game. My number 3 game is Hansa Teutonica. Hansa Teutonica came out quite a while back, but it's had a re-release in big box form, which is the box with all of the expansion stuff that's around. I really enjoyed it. Such a good game. The closest game that I have to it is probably Turn and Taxis, if you have played that before, which you may not have, because that, once again, is quite an old game. The idea is you're building paths between 2 cities. Once you've done that, you're then moving one of your tokens into one of the cities to say, I have a route that goes through that city. You have a board in front of you that you are trying to clear things off, because that gives you extra benefit and extra ability to move forward and do stuff as you're playing through the game. And there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can play this game. There's a whole bunch of different angles that you can come at it from. And what I find with games like this is there's a lot of density to the thinking process, but the actual rule set isn't hugely dense. So there's a lot of thinking going on, and there's a lot of different ways you can play that will get you towards a really good score at the end. But the understanding of what you're doing is actually really straightforward. My number 2 game for 2021 is Praga Kaput Regni. Once again, this is another one of those games that has a relatively easy understanding of what you're doing, but so darn much thinking all the way through that to kind of get the stuff in and do the stuff. All of the games that are hitting the top of this list are intense games to play. They're not super heavy in terms of the rule set, but in terms of the thinking that you're doing while you're playing, there's a heck of a lot going on and a heck of a lot to think about. Once again, Praga Kaput Regni has this idea of, if you follow this path, that will get you a lot of points by the end of the game. Whereas if you do a little bit on this path, a little bit on this path, a little bit on this path, each of the things you do is only worth a few points. And so you kind of need to choose a direction and go that way in order to do really well by the end of the game. There is so much going on with this one that I'd like immersing myself in this game. And my number 1 game for 2021 is Merv. Now, Merv is such a good game. The whole idea of it is that you are choosing, in turn order, you're choosing one of 5 spaces. Once you've chosen the space, you then have the ability to do any of the elements below that space. But the further into the game, if you pick a line that has a whole bunch of your markers, you can get all of the resource coming in from every marker. And what that ends up doing is pushing you towards using the same lines multiple times, or setting yourself up to be able to get a heap of income from a particular line when you get around to it. Because you're working all the way around a square, you end up with uber income, not a whole bunch of income. Uber income, not a whole bunch of income. But being able to set yourself up to be able to get a lot of cubes of different colors in is really worthwhile. The game on the table is there's so darn much going on with this one. Simply because you've got all the space over here that you can move through. You've got this space, this space, this space. There's a lot of different things that can be done. In order to do any of those things, you need to have cubes of either the same color or different colors. And you go to a spot, you pick a location. Once you pick that location, get all the cubes in, you then do the thing that location is talking about, the area of the board that spot is talking about. There's so much going on with this. I think that I may have called that this was going to be my top game when I did the Gamesplainer of it really early in the year. And I was right. It's such a good game to really get your teeth into. And just like the last 5 games or so, you kind of need to play them a couple of times to really understand what's going on, to enable you to do really well with them on future plays. But, oh man, it's a good game. Look, I think that I will leave it there. That's my 2021. I hope that my top 10 has helped you find what is really good, or at least get a feel for the things that I personally like out of gaming. But there it is. So that was my top 10. I hope you've had a really good year. I hope that 2022 brings us a really good year as well. And I'm looking forward to all the new games that are coming out. If you have any comments or suggestions, please write them below. If you have any games that you would like to be gamesplained, please shoot me an email to thegamesplainer@gmail.com. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter @thegamesplainer to keep up to date with the games that I'm playing. Subscribe to my videos to keep up to date with the games that I'm gamesplaining. And until next time, enjoy gaming.